He had ordered men buried alive for lesser betrayals. He had made judges weep and senators beg. But on the afternoon Vincent Moretti signed his divorce papers without reading them, between a phone call about a shipment and a meeting about a traitor, he unknowingly signed away the only thing his empire could never replace. Not his wife, not his fortune, his unborn son. The most feared man in New York didn't lose his family to a rival bullet or a federal indictment. He lost them to 30 seconds of arrogance and a pen stroke that cost him everything. If this story hits different, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens 6 years later will break you. The rain came down hard the night Eleanor first knew something was wrong. Not the kind of knowing that arrives with evidence, receipts, lipstick, a strange perfume on a collar. This was older than that. This was the kind of knowing that lives in the stomach, that wakes you at 3 in the morning and sits on your chest until you can't breathe. Eleanor Moretti had been carrying it for weeks, maybe longer, though she had spent considerable energy convincing herself she was imagining things. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse, 42 floors above Manhattan, watching the city bleed neon into the wet streets below. Behind her, the apartment was immaculate. White marble, dark wood, flowers she had arranged herself because Vincent's staff always got it wrong. Everything in this home was arranged by her hands. Every painting selected, every dinner planned. She had built this place into something that looked like a life. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. Vincent had called at 4 that afternoon, said the meeting with the captains was running long, said don't wait up. His voice had been perfectly even, which was itself the tell. Vincent Moretti was a man of controlled tones, but when he was lying, the control became something mechanical, like a recording of himself rather than the man. She had heard that recording before. Eleanor turned away from the window and picked up her coat. She wasn't going to wait. The hotel was on 58th Street, 7 blocks from the penthouse. She knew it not because she had followed him before, but because she had found the reservation confirmation 3 weeks ago buried in a stack of papers on his desk. A suite booked under a subsidiary name, one of the shell companies Vincent used for things he didn't want his name attached to directly. She had photographed it on her phone and said nothing. Had eaten dinner with him that night and discussed Noah Bellini's daughter's wedding and whether the gift was appropriate. Had smiled at the right moments. She was good at that. She had been good at that for 11 years. The doorman at the hotel didn't look at her twice. She walked through the lobby with her chin up and her coat buttoned and found a position near the elevator bank behind a large arrangement of white orchids. She didn't know what she expected to feel. Rage, maybe. The hot, clarifying kind that makes everything simple. Or grief, the kind that folds you in half. What she felt instead was a terrible stillness. Vincent arrived at 7:14. She recognized the width of his shoulders before she saw his face. That particular way he carried himself, the unconscious ownership of whatever room he entered, as if the space rearranged itself to accommodate him. He was wearing the charcoal suit she had picked out for him last month. He was laughing at something the woman beside him had said. Bianca Romano. Eleanor knew her, had met her at 3 separate events, had shaken her hand. She was 28, dark-haired, with the kind of beauty that made rooms tilt slightly. She had been Vincent's personal secretary for 14 months. Eleanor had never once allowed herself to feel threatened by her, because she believed, had chosen to believe, that whatever Vincent was, he was not that kind of man. She watched them cross the lobby together, watched Bianca's hand brush Vincent's arm, watched him lean down and say something low near her ear, and watched the way Bianca's face opened up like a window. Eleanor did not move. She stood behind the orchids and breathed through her nose, slow and deliberate, the way she had learned to breathe through pain. She had learned that from childbirth, not that she'd had children yet, but from watching her sister, from understanding that some things you simply had to breathe through. The elevator doors closed behind them. She stood there for another minute, maybe 2. Then she walked back out into the rain. She didn't cry on the way home. She didn't cry in the elevator going up to the penthouse, or in the bathroom where she stood under the shower until the water went cold, or in the kitchen where she poured 2 fingers of scotch and didn't drink it. The tears didn't come from any of those places. They came later, around midnight, when she was sitting at the vanity in the bedroom they shared and she caught her own reflection, really looked at it, maybe for the first time in months, and saw what 11 years in this life had made of her face. Not old, not ruined, just careful, just endlessly, exhaustingly careful. She pressed her fingers against her mouth and let herself cry for exactly 8 minutes. Then she stopped. She was Eleanor Sinclair Moretti. She had been raised by a woman who survived things that would have ended lesser people. She did not have the luxury of falling apart. She opened the vanity drawer for a tissue, and her hand closed instead around something she had forgotten was there. A pregnancy test. She had bought it 6 days ago on impulse, talked herself out of using it, buried it under a box of hairpins. Her cycle was late, but her cycle was often late when she was under stress, and she was always under stress. So she had filed it away as biological noise and moved on. She sat there for a long time holding the box. Then she walked to the bathroom. The result appeared in 90 seconds. She sat on the edge of the bathtub and looked at the 2 pink lines for so long that they began to blur. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Vincent Moretti's child, and the man was 7 blocks away in a hotel suite with another woman. Eleanor set the test on the edge of the sink very carefully, as if it were something fragile, and she walked back to the vanity and sat down again and looked at herself in the mirror. The careful face looked back. She thought about what it would mean to tell him, to walk into whatever version of morning came next and place that test in front of him and watch his face move through its calculations. He would feel something. She believed that. Some remnant of herself still believed that. But Vincent Moretti's feelings had always been filtered through strategy. Everything was. Even his love, when it existed, had the quality of an asset being managed. She thought about what it would mean to stay. She thought about what it would mean for a child to grow up inside this empire, inside these walls, these silences, this careful performance of a family that had hollowed itself out somewhere along the way. She opened her laptop. She called her attorney at 12:47 in the morning. He answered on the 3rd ring, which told her something about the kind of client she had married into. His clients did not have ordinary emergencies at ordinary hours. "I need divorce papers," she said. "Tonight." A pause. "Eleanor, I need them ready to sign by morning. Can you do that?" Another pause. Longer. "Yes." "Thank you." She spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table. The scotch sat untouched. She drank water and read through every document her attorney sent, line by line, because she was going to do this correctly. She was not going to do this in rage or in grief or in the blurred emotional weather of 2 in the morning. She was going to do this cleanly. She did not write him a letter. She did not want to explain herself to a man who had not thought she deserved an explanation. At 5:40 in the morning, she placed the signed documents on his desk in the study, weighted down by her wedding ring, a 3-carat solitaire that had once meant something enormous, that now felt like an object from another person's life. She straightened the papers so the edges were aligned. She was not capable of doing even this messily. She did not look back at the ring after she set it down. She was not a woman who looked back. She had packed 2 bags the previous week, she realized. Not consciously, not as a plan, but some part of her had already known. The bags were in the back of the guest room closet. She retrieved them now, called the car service she had set up independently months ago under her maiden name, and rode down 42 floors in the service elevator. The lobby was empty. The doorman was asleep at his station. She walked out into the pre-dawn streets of Manhattan and did not stop. Vincent found the papers at 8:15 that morning between a call from his consigliere about a dock workers' dispute and a text from his driver about the afternoon schedule. He stood at his desk in his bathrobe, still damp from the shower, and looked at the document with the kind of expression he usually reserved for mildly inconvenient news. A traffic delay. A late delivery. He flipped to the last page. Saw Eleanor's signature. Saw his ring. He stood there for perhaps 30 seconds, which for Vincent Moretti was a significant pause. Then he picked up his phone and called Marco, his personal attorney. "Eleanor filed," he said. "I know," Marco said. "She called me last night." A muscle moved in Vincent's jaw. "She called you." "She's my client too, Vincent. I recused. She found representation." He set the phone down without responding, looked at the ring on his desk, looked at the neat, careful alignment of the papers. Eleanor was many things. She was precise. She was contained. She was, when she needed to be, absolutely merciless in a way that looked nothing like cruelty because it was always so perfectly quiet. He should call her. He told himself he would call her later, that she was upset. Understandably, he supposed, if she had found out about Bianca, which she must have somehow. That she would cool down. That Eleanor always eventually came back to equilibrium because Eleanor was not someone who allowed disorder to persist in her life. He signed the papers at 11:14 while on a conference call about a real estate acquisition in Miami. He didn't read them first. It never occurred to him to read them first. He slid them into the outgoing mail tray on his desk and went back to his call. 3 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. He waited for Eleanor to surface, to reach out, to demand something, money, an explanation, a confrontation. Eleanor had always struck him as someone who would eventually want the confrontation. She didn't. She had vanished as completely as if she had never existed, which was a feat he genuinely admired even as it unsettled him, because very few people managed to disappear from the world Vincent Moretti occupied. He had resources. He had contacts in 3 federal agencies, 2 police departments, and a network of private intelligence operatives who could find a man hiding in a rural Montana farmhouse within 72 hours. They found nothing. She was simply gone. He told himself it was better this way. Clean, finished. He brought Bianca to a dinner at the Four Seasons 2 weeks after the divorce finalized. Watched the way the room responded, the careful looks, the recalibrations, the men who worked for him filing this new information away. Bianca was luminous that night, laughing easily, touching his arm, performing the role of woman beside powerful man with genuine skill. He felt, sitting across from her in the candlelight, a vague and formless dissatisfaction he couldn't locate precisely enough to examine. He ordered another drink and let it go. That was February. By July, the cracks had started. They began the way cracks always begin in Vincent's world, not with a dramatic rupture, but with small, accumulating wrongnesses. A shipment that arrived short. A captain who gave an answer that was technically true, but somehow evasive. A meeting that ran longer than it should have because 2 men who were supposed to trust each other spent 40 minutes not quite saying what they meant. Vincent had built his empire on his ability to read rooms, to feel the barometric pressure of loyalty and deception. He had learned it at his father's knee, refined it through 20 years of decisions that carried life and death weight. He could feel it now. The organization shifting, settling into new configurations, testing the load-bearing walls. And at the center of it, quiet as a rot, was Bianca. He didn't know yet what she had done. He wouldn't know for months. But he felt her somehow, felt the shape of her ambition, which he had initially mistaken for drive, the way you mistake similar things in the dark. She was building something. He didn't know what. He didn't know yet that she had been building it for 14 months, that his captains had been receiving calls he didn't know about, that she had identified his vulnerabilities with the patience of someone who had been studying him for a long time. He didn't know any of that yet. What he knew, in that July, was that something was off, and that his apartment felt very large and very empty, and that when he sat at his desk at night and saw the space where his wedding ring used to sit, he felt something he couldn't afford to name. It was during a routine legal review 8 months after the divorce that one of his attorneys found the document. It had been misfiled. An administrative error so mundane, so cleanly accidental, that it almost wasn't worth noting. A prenatal examination record. A single page, folded, tucked inside the envelope with Eleanor's divorce records. The attorney, a careful young man named Prescott, who had been with the firm 6 months, almost discarded it without reading it. He read it. He sat for a long time. Then he put on his jacket and drove across town to Vincent's office and asked to be seen immediately. Vincent looked up from his desk when Prescott entered. Read the young man's face, white, careful, the expression of someone carrying something they don't want to carry, and felt the first small cold thread of something move through his chest. "What?" Vincent said. Prescott set the document on the desk. Vincent looked at it. The header, the date, the patient name, Eleanor Sinclair Moretti. He read it. He read it again. The room did not change. The city outside the window continued its ordinary noise. His phone buzzed twice on the corner of the desk, and he did not hear it. Prenatal examination. 8 weeks gestation. All indicators normal. Follow-up recommended at 12 weeks. The date of the examination was 2 days before Eleanor had signed the divorce papers. 2 days. He sat very still. He had signed those papers 11 hours into a phone call about a real estate acquisition in Miami. He had not read them. He had placed them in the outgoing mail tray and gone back to his meeting. He had been so certain, so completely certain, that Eleanor would come back, that this was one more negotiation in a long marriage full of negotiations, that he had treated the end of his marriage like a scheduling inconvenience. And she had been 8 weeks pregnant. She had been carrying his child. She had known. And she had left anyway. He put both hands flat on the desk and looked at the space between them and understood, for the first time in his life, what it meant to have earned something you could not survive. His phone buzzed again. He didn't move. Outside, New York went on the way. New York always goes on. Indifferent, enormous, full of people doing things they would regret. Vincent Moretti sat at his desk in his empire and felt the floor shift beneath him. Because somewhere in this city, or not in this city, somewhere beyond his reach, beyond his contacts and his intelligence operatives and his millions, Eleanor was raising his child. And he had signed that child away without looking up from his phone. He reached for his phone now, not to call anyone, just to have something to hold. His hand was shaking. In 30 years, through FBI investigations, rival assassinations, federal indictments, and every species of violence the underworld had produced, Vincent Moretti's hands had never shaken. They were shaking now. He looked at Prescott, who was still standing by the door. "Find her," Vincent said. His voice came out wrong. Too quiet. Too raw. "Find her, whatever it costs. Bring me everything." Prescott nodded and left. Vincent sat alone in his office for a long time after that, with the prenatal document on his desk and his hands spread flat against the wood, and understood with the cold, specific clarity of a man who had always prided himself on seeing things as they are that he had made the worst mistake of his life. Not the affair, not the divorce, the 30 seconds he had spent not reading a document. 30 seconds. That was all it had taken. He had dismantled 11 years of marriage and abandoned his unborn child in 30 seconds of arrogance, and the woman he had wronged was so far gone that his entire network couldn't find a trace of her. What nobody in that building knew, what no one in his organization would learn until much later, was that Eleanor had not simply disappeared. She had built something entirely her own, in a city he had never thought to look, under a name he had never thought to search, raising a boy with his eyes and his jaw and his stubborn, unyielding temper. A boy who had no idea his father existed. A boy who was, at that very moment, 6 months old and sleeping in a small apartment 3 states away, with no knowledge of empires or betrayal or the cost of 30 seconds. His name was Noah, and Vincent Moretti didn't know he was alive. The search lasted 11 months. Vincent threw money at it the way he had thrown money at everything in his life that refused to cooperate, in large, impatient quantities, with the expectation that sufficient resources applied to any problem would eventually produce a result. He hired 4 separate private investigation firms, deliberately keeping them ignorant of each other so that no single team could sandbag the operation or hold information hostage for additional fees. He activated every federal contact he had cultivated over 2 decades, men who owed him favors they had been hoping never to repay. He reached into his international network, a loose, careful arrangement of intelligence brokers operating in the gray space between governments and criminal organizations, and put Eleanor's name into circulation. He got nothing, or rather, he got fragments, traces that dissolved the moment you tried to grip them. Eleanor Sinclair Moretti had closed every bank account within 48 hours of leaving. Her cell phone had been found abandoned in a midtown trash can, wiped clean. Her car, a black Mercedes registered in both their names, had been left in a parking garage near Penn Station with the keys in the ignition. Every digital footprint had been erased with a precision that told him she had planned this, had been planning it long before the night she walked out, which meant she had looked at him across dinner tables and smiled at the right moments and been building her exit for God knows how long. That knowledge sat in him like something calcified, hard and permanent and occasionally sharp. His lead investigator, a former DEA operative named Sutter, who had found missing persons in 6 countries and once tracked a federal witness across 4 fake identities, sat across from Vincent's desk in December and delivered his assessment with the flat effect of a man who did not enjoy admitting failure. "She's good," Sutter said. "I know she's good," Vincent said. "Find her anyway. I'm telling you the shape of the problem. She didn't just run. She prepared. New identity infrastructure takes months to build correctly. Documents, credit history, the works. She had help. Vincent looked at him. What kind of help? Professional, not your world. Someone who does this for domestic abuse cases, witness protection adjacent. There are organizations. Sutter paused. She planned to disappear before she had a reason to. That means she saw this coming before you gave her a reason. The room went very quiet. Vincent stood up from his desk slowly and walked to the window and stood there with his back to Sutter for a long time. Keep looking, he said. Sutter kept looking. Through January. Through February. Through the spring that arrived with its usual indifferent beauty, while Vincent's organization continued its slow internal hemorrhage, and Bianca continued to make herself at home in his life in ways he was only beginning to understand were calculated. She had moved efficiently. He had to give her that. By March, she was attending dinners he hadn't explicitly invited her to. By April, 2 of his captains had begun consulting her informally on matters that were not her concern. Not dramatically. Nothing so obvious. Just small redirections. A question asked in her direction when it should have gone to Vincent. An opinion solicited when she was present in the room. The kind of incremental territorial expansion that, if you weren't watching for it, looked like nothing at all. Vincent was watching for it. He had been watching for it since February, when Carmine Esposito, his oldest captain, a man who had been with his father before him, who had sat at Vincent's right hand for 19 years, had said something at the end of a meeting that didn't land right. Bianca had an interesting point about the West Side situation. That was all. 5 words. Carmine had already moved on to the next topic before Vincent could respond, and there was nothing in the sentence itself that warranted a reaction. But Vincent had sat with it for 3 days, turning it over. When had Bianca had a point about the West Side situation? When had she and Carmine discussed the West Side situation? And why was Carmine offering her opinion as relevant data in a meeting she hadn't attended? He waited. He was good at waiting. It was possibly his greatest skill, the one that had kept him alive longer than any weapon or alliance. The ability to hold very still and let things reveal themselves. The revelation came in April, through a channel so unexpected that he almost missed it. A man named Del Vecchio, who ran a small loan operation on the outer edge of the Moretti territory and who owed Vincent a debt of long standing, called and asked for a meeting. Not at the office, not at any of the usual locations. He wanted to meet at a diner in Queens at 7 in the morning, which was the kind of request that carried its own message. This man was scared enough to be inconvenient. Vincent went alone, or nearly alone. 2 men sat in a car outside, which was the closest he came to alone these days. Del Vecchio was already there when he arrived, nursing a coffee with the expression of someone who had not slept. He was a small man, 50-something, with a badly reset nose and the permanently cautious eyes of someone who had spent his adult life operating in spaces where the wrong word had physical consequences. He waited until Vincent sat down before he spoke. "I'm telling you this because I owe you," Del Vecchio said. "And because I want that debt acknowledged as paid. After today, I don't want any further association. Tell me what you came to tell me." Del Vecchio wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "6 months ago, I was approached by someone asking questions about your operation. Not your business specifically, your structure. Who reports to who, where the pressure points are, what would happen to certain accounts if certain conversations got to certain people." Vincent's face did not move. "Who approached you?" "A man I don't know personally, but I know who sent him." Del Vecchio looked at the table. "She's been building a file, Vincent. On you, on the operation. She's been feeding it upward, to people who could use it." The coffee machine behind the counter made a sound. Someone at the far end of the diner laughed at something. The ordinary world continued its ordinary operations. "How long?" Vincent said. "Based on what this man told me?" "She started before you 2 were together. Before the divorce." Del Vecchio finally looked up. "She came in knowing what she was doing. She came in with a plan." Vincent paid for both coffees. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the diner with the measured, unhurried step he had perfected over decades. The walk that communicated that nothing touched him, that he had already processed whatever you'd given him and filed it appropriately. He sat in the back of the car and said nothing for 20 minutes while his driver navigated the morning traffic back toward Manhattan. Then he said, "Take me to the office." He spent the next 3 weeks running a parallel internal investigation so quiet that not even Marco knew about it. He used 2 men he trusted absolutely. Not because they were loyal to him personally, but because they were loyal to outcomes, because they were the kind of men who understood that their value was contingent on their reliability, and who had, therefore, built reliability into something close to a moral code. What they found took the floor out from under him. It wasn't everything. He would spend months assembling the complete picture. But what he found in those 3 weeks was enough. Enough to show him the architecture of what Bianca had built, the careful scaffolding of favors and information and strategic proximity she had constructed over 14 months inside his organization. She had identified 3 captains who were dissatisfied, not dangerously so, not enough to defect under normal circumstances, but dissatisfied enough to receive a sympathetic ear with gratitude. She had made herself sympathetic to each of them in different ways, in different conversations, in what each man believed was a private and organic connection. She had fed information about 2 of his operations to a rival family, not as a direct betrayal, but as a currency, establishing credit she could draw on later. And she had done all of this while sleeping beside him. Vincent sat with this for one night, just one night, alone in the penthouse that still didn't feel like his, in the room where Eleanor's clothes had once hung and now held nothing but the particular silence of empty space. He sat in the chair by the window with a glass of scotch he didn't drink, and let himself feel the full weight of what he had done, not what Bianca had done to him. He wasn't interested in that accounting, what he had done, the sequence of decisions that had led him here, the affair, the signed papers, the 11 months of fruitless searching, the nights of sitting in this apartment that had once contained Eleanor's careful order and was now just a large, expensive box. The way he had made it so easy. The way he had handed a woman with a plan the keys to his kingdom and called it a relationship. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about what kind of woman packs 2 bags in advance and calls an attorney at midnight and leaves her wedding ring aligned precisely with the edges of the papers she's just signed. The kind of woman who does not say a single word in her own defense because she has already concluded that the defense is not worth making. The kind of woman who takes her intelligence and her self-possession and her evidently considerable survival skills and simply walks out of her life and builds another one from nothing. He thought about the baby. He thought about 8 weeks. He picked up the scotch and put it back down without drinking it. In the morning, he called Bianca. He asked her to come to the office at 10. His voice was pleasant. He had spent 20 years making his voice pleasant when his intentions were otherwise, and he was very good at it. She arrived in a cream-colored dress with her dark hair loose, which was a choice, a costume assembled for an audience she expected to still be performing for. She was good. He acknowledged it, sitting behind his desk watching her enter the room. She was genuinely, impressively good. The ease in her body, the warmth in her smile, the way she let her hand rest briefly on the back of the chair across from his desk before sitting. A gesture so natural you'd have to know to look for what it was. A claim. "Good morning," she said. "Sit down, Bianca." She sat, crossed her legs, waited with the expression of someone ready to be helpful. Vincent opened the folder on his desk and slid it across to her. He watched her face. She looked at the first page and her expression didn't change. It held, maintained its helpful readiness, but it held the way ice holds before it cracks. That half second where the structure is still technically intact, but the outcome is already decided. "What is this?" she said. "You know what it is." "Vincent, don't." His voice hadn't changed. It was still pleasant, still controlled. The pleasantness was the most frightening thing about it, and she knew it because her chin came up a fraction of an inch, a small involuntary brace. "Don't do the thing where you explain, 'I've had 3 weeks. I have everything.'" She closed the folder and set it on the desk with a care that mirrored Eleanor's care with the divorce papers, and he noted the irony of that, the way 2 entirely different women had both used precise, controlled movement as their armor in this office. "You were going to end it anyway," Bianca said. "You and I both know that. That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" The warmth was gone now. What replaced it was something harder, more honest, and, he had to admit, more interesting. This was closer to the real thing. "You've been half present for 11 months, Vincent, since she left. You think I couldn't see that? You see a lot of things that aren't your business to see. Your captains are unhappy. Your operation has soft spots you haven't addressed. I identified them. You fed information to the Salerno family. Still pleasant, still level. You took what I trusted you with, and you sold it. Silence. The first real silence. She hadn't known he knew that specifically. Get your things, Vincent said. You'll be compensated fairly for your time in the position. You'll be given specific and precise instructions about what you will and will not say about this organization going forward, and those instructions will be explained to you in terms you understand, and then you will leave. She stood up. Her hands were steady, which he respected. She's not coming back, you know, Bianca said from the doorway. Wherever she is. She's not coming back. He didn't respond. She left. He sat at his desk for a while after that, in the quiet office with the mid-morning light coming through the windows, and understood that she was probably right. Wherever Eleanor was, whatever life she had built, she was not the kind of woman who came back. She had made a decision with full information and executed it without hesitation, and had been executing it for almost a year now. Whatever he needed to say to himself about second chances and reconciliation, Eleanor had already had this conversation with herself and reached her conclusions. He had a son he had never met. That was the thing. That was the weight he carried around the clock now, the one that had no equivalent in his previous experience. He had done things in his life that he carried differently, with the particular separated heaviness of a man who has compartmentalized well and often. But this one would not compartmentalize. It was too specific, too granular. He found himself doing the mathematics of it compulsively, at odd hours. The boy was now, by his calculation, nearly 14 months old. He was walking, probably. Maybe talking, a little. He had Vincent's blood. He had Eleanor's precision and Vincent's stubbornness, most likely because the mathematics of genetics in the Moretti line ran heavily towards stubbornness. He didn't know his name. That was the part that broke something he didn't have language for, not knowing his son's name. Sutter called in June with a development that was not quite a lead and not quite nothing. Someone matching her description enrolled a child in a pediatric practice in a city I'm not going to name on this call, Sutter said. The enrollment used a name I don't recognize, which is consistent with a new identity. I can't confirm it's her, but the physical description of the woman and the child's age are consistent. Vincent closed his eyes. How sure are you? 60%, maybe 65. That's not enough. No, Sutter agreed. It's not. If I move on 65% and it's wrong, we lose the trail and potentially alert her that we're close, which pushes her further. A pause. I need more time. You have more time. He waited. The summer was brutal. His organization absorbed 2 significant hits from the Salerno family. Hits that Bianca's intelligence sharing had made possible, though he couldn't prove that to anyone's satisfaction, and proving it wasn't his priority anyway. He absorbed the losses, restructured around them, addressed the captains who had allowed themselves to be cultivated by a woman with an agenda. Those conversations were not pleasant. Carmine Esposito sat across from him in August and said, I made a mistake in judgment, which was the most any man in this organization could be expected to say. Yes, Vincent said. It won't happen again. No, Vincent agreed. It won't. Carmine left. Vincent looked at the empty chair and thought about the 19 years behind it, and the way loyalty, even genuine loyalty, could be eroded in the right conditions by the right person, and he thought about what that said about his own failures of attention. He had been distracted. He had been distracted for 11 months by a search that produced nothing, and before that by a marriage that had been emptying for years while he looked the other way, and the distraction had cost him. In money, in position, in the concrete operational damage that he was still assessing. He could recover from it. He would recover from it. He had recovered from worse. But the boy, he could not recover from the boy with money or strategy or operational restructuring. That was a different kind of damage, the irreversible kind. It was September when Sutter called again. I have her, he said. Vincent stood up from his desk, sat back down. His heart was doing something it hadn't done in years, behaving badly, knocking against his ribs with an urgency that bypassed all of his careful training. Where? He said. Philadelphia. She's been there since last February, by my estimation. New name, new employment. She's working for an architectural design firm doing project management. The boy is in daycare 3 blocks from her apartment. He's healthy. A pause. And in the pause, something that might have been human consideration from a man not generally given to it. He's healthy, Vincent. Dark hair, from what I can see from a distance. Vincent said nothing. His name is Noah. The word landed in his room and stayed there. Noah. He had a name. His son had a name, a real name, a name Eleanor had chosen and given him without consulting anyone, without asking permission from the man who had signed his existence away, without reading the document. She doesn't know we found her, Sutter continued. What do you want to do? And here it was, the moment that every decision he'd made in the previous 11 months had been building toward, and he was not ready for it. He had spent 11 months telling himself that finding her was the goal, that once he found her, the rest would arrange itself, that his certainty of what needed to happen would carry him through the moment of actually having to do it. He wasn't ready, because Sutter was asking him what to do, and what he wanted to do was go to Philadelphia immediately, tonight, with his convoy and his presence and the full weight of what he was, and find the woman and the boy and insert himself into the situation by force of personality and resources, the way he had inserted himself into every situation for 30 years. And he knew, in the part of himself that was separate from pride, the part that Eleanor had always seen more clearly than he could, that if he did that, he would lose them both permanently. He sat with his hands flat on the desk. Nothing, he said. We do nothing yet. Vincent, she's not going anywhere. She's settled. She has a life. He felt the words in his chest like something being set in concrete. I need to think. Understood. Don't lose her. I won't. He put the phone down. Outside the office window, New York was beginning its September evening, the light going amber, the streets filling with people going home to families they took for granted, with the comfortable arrogance of people who have never had to reckon with the cost of not paying attention. He watched them from 40 floors up, these small, insistent figures with their ordinary urgencies, and he thought about a boy named Noah in a daycare in Philadelphia who had dark hair and had never heard his father's name. He thought about what Sutter had said. She's built a life. And that was the thing he hadn't prepared for, the thing that changed the calculation in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had imagined Eleanor in survival mode, struggling maybe, rebuilding from nothing. Part of him, the part he was least proud of, had imagined her needing him. She didn't need him. She had built something, a job, an apartment, a name for her son. She had taken the worst thing he had ever done to her and turned it into the architecture of an independent life. And the fact of it was both devastating and the most Eleanor thing she had ever done. He opened his desk drawer. At the bottom, underneath several folders and a handgun he hadn't touched in months, was the prenatal document. He had kept it. This single page, this clinical record that had redirected the entire course of his life. He took it out and held it and looked at the date. 2 days before she signed. She had known. She had sat in a doctor's office, 8 weeks pregnant, received confirmation of what her body had already been telling her, and driven home to a penthouse she shared with a man who was at that moment in a hotel 7 blocks away. And she had made a decision, not in rage, not in grief. Eleanor didn't make decisions in emotional weather. She made them the way she arranged flowers and signed documents and walked away, with a terrifying, deliberate quiet. He thought about what kind of woman could carry that, what kind of strength it took to look at a positive pregnancy test and a cheating husband and respond not with screaming or confrontation, but with a midnight phone call to an attorney and 2 pre-packed bags in a guest room closet. He put the document back in the drawer. He stood up and went to the window and looked at the city. He had spent 11 months looking for Eleanor, so he could ask her for something. He hadn't been sure what. Forgiveness, maybe, or the chance to know his son, or some version of reconciliation he couldn't define clearly, because defining it clearly would have required him to acknowledge how much he had lost. He was sure now. He was sure now because Sutter had said the boy was healthy and had dark hair and his name was Noah, and that single sentence had done something to the floor of Vincent Moretti's chest that no business failure, no federal investigation, no rival family's aggression had ever managed to do. It had opened something old and undefended. He turned from the window. He needed to see his son. Not tonight, not the way his instincts demanded, with force, with presence, with the full weight of who he was. He needed to do it right, which meant doing something Vincent Moretti had almost no practice at. He needed to ask permission. He picked up his phone. He looked at Sutter's number for a long time. Then he looked at Marco's number. Then he put the phone down and walked to his desk and wrote, by hand, on a single sheet of paper, the first draft of a letter he would spend 3 weeks rewriting. Not a demand, not a legal instrument, not a negotiation. A letter. To Eleanor. He was halfway through the second sentence when his office door opened without a knock, which never happened, which was physically impossible in the structure of his organization because everyone knew better. And Carmine Esposito walked in with a face that had gone the color of old concrete. "We have a problem," Carmine said. Vincent looked up from the letter. "What kind?" "The Salerno kind." Carmine put both hands on the back of the chair across from the desk, the same chair Bianca had sat in, the same chair Eleanor's attorney had sat in years ago when they drafted the first version of what became their prenatal nightmare. "They know about Philadelphia, Vincent." The room went very still. "Say that again," Vincent said quietly. "They know you found her. Someone in Sutter's operation talked. I don't know who, I don't know how far it's gone, but they know she's in Philadelphia, and they know about the boy." Carmine's jaw was tight. "If they move on her before you do." Vincent was already on his feet. The letter sat on the desk, half finished, the ink still wet on a sentence that began with the words, "I don't expect you to forgive me." He didn't look at it as he crossed the room. The moment for letters was over. He made 3 calls in the elevator going down. The first was to Sutter. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, which had never happened before in 11 months of working together, and the 4 rings sat in Vincent's chest like a diagnosis. The second was to Donovan, his head of security, who picked up on the first ring and listened without interrupting while Vincent spoke in the clipped, compressed language they had developed over years of situations that required maximum information in minimum words. "Philadelphia, now. Full detail. The woman and the boy." "How many do you want?" "Enough. 20 minutes. She..." The third call was to a number he had never used before. A direct line to a federal contact so deeply embedded in the arrangement between his organization and certain governmental interests that the number itself was not written anywhere, only memorized. The man who answered did not say hello. "I need a favor called in," Vincent said. "Philadelphia, tonight." A long pause. "That's a significant ask." "I know what it is." Another pause. "Give me the address." Vincent gave it. He was in the car by the time he ended the third call, moving through Manhattan traffic with 2 vehicles front and back. Donovan in the passenger seat running logistics on a second phone. The city slid past the windows in its usual indifferent blur. Restaurants filling up for the evening, couples walking. The whole ordinary machinery of people who did not know that somewhere in Philadelphia, a woman and a 14-month-old boy were potentially in the crosshairs of a decision Vincent had made by hiring an investigator who had, somewhere in his operation, a leak. That was the thing Vincent's mind kept returning to, even as he managed the logistics, even as he ran the calculations of time and distance and what the Salerno family's operational speed looked like under pressure. The leak. Sutter's operation. He looked at Carmine in the rearview mirror. Carmine had insisted on coming, which was either loyalty or something else, and Vincent had not yet decided which. "Who knew about Sutter?" Vincent said. Carmine met his eyes in the mirror. "What do you mean?" "I mean, who in this organization knew I had hired Sutter specifically? Who knew his name?" A pause. "The car hit a pothole and nobody registered it." "You, me, Marco," Carmine said. "Prescott knew about the search generally, not the specific operative." "And Bianca?" Silence. "Bianca was gone by the time Sutter found the Philadelphia lead," Carmine said carefully. "She was gone from the office. She wasn't gone from every conversation she'd ever had with every captain who might have mentioned, in passing, the name of the man Vincent Moretti hired to find his ex-wife." Vincent looked out the window. "Call Marco. Tell him to stay where he is and not to speak to anyone until I reach out." "Vincent, call him." Carmine called him. They crossed into New Jersey at 9:47. Vincent sat in the back of the car and did not look at his phone and did not speak, which was the thing about him that had always unnerved the men around him more than the anger. The stillness. The complete animal stillness of a man processing something enormous at a speed that didn't show on the surface. He was thinking about Bianca. He was thinking about the architecture of what she had built, what his investigators had partially uncovered, and how he had assumed, Because he was arrogant. Because he had always been arrogant. Because his arrogance was so fundamental to his functioning that he sometimes forgot it was a flaw and not a feature. He had assumed that removing her from the organization had ended her operational capacity. He had cut the head off something and assumed the body would stop moving. He had been wrong about that before. He had his phone out now, running back through what he knew, the pieces his investigators had assembled over 3 weeks in the summer, the connections to the Salerno family, the information she had sold, the captains she had cultivated. He had addressed the captains. He had ended the relationship. He had restructured around the damage. What he had not done, and he saw it now with the cold, specific clarity of a man watching himself make a mistake in slow motion, what he had not done was ask why. Not why she had done it. He understood ambition. He understood the calculation of using proximity to power as a ladder. That was ordinary. What he had not asked was why now. Why, after 14 months of careful positioning, had she begun moving more aggressively in the spring? What had changed the timeline? He knew the answer before he finished forming the question. She had known about Sutter. She had known Vincent was searching for Eleanor, and she had understood, with the strategic intelligence he had consistently underestimated, that if Vincent found Eleanor, if he found the boy, the entire emotional landscape of his organization would shift. His focus would shift. His priorities would restructure around a child he had never met, around a woman he had lost, around the particular kind of guilt that makes powerful men do irrational things. She had begun accelerating because she was running out of time, and when Sutter found Philadelphia, she had done the last thing she had available to her. She had handed Eleanor's location to the Salerno family, not to have Eleanor harmed necessarily. Vincent didn't think she was that specific. She had handed it over as a chess move, to force Vincent into a reactive position, to pull him out of his operational center at a critical moment, to demonstrate to the Salerno family that she was still a valuable source of information, and therefore still worth protecting. Eleanor and Noah were not targets, they were leverage. That distinction did not make Vincent's hand stop shaking. They reached Philadelphia at 11:20. Sutter still wasn't answering. Donovan had pulled the address of Eleanor's apartment from the file Sutter had compiled. A third-floor unit in a quiet neighborhood of restored row houses, the kind of neighborhood that suggested Eleanor had found her footing, had chosen something modest and considered, and exactly right for the life she was trying to build. Of course she had. Eleanor had never made careless choices about her environment. They came in quietly. 2 vehicles. 6 men, plus Donovan, plus Vincent. No sirens, no theater. The street was residential and dark. 11:30 on a Tuesday, and the last thing Vincent needed was to announce himself to the Salerno scouts he assumed were in the area. Donovan pointed at a dark sedan parked across from the building's entrance. That's been there a while. Engine's warm. How many inside? Can't know from here. Vincent looked at the building. 3rd floor. He could see a light in the window. His stomach did something that had no tactical name. I'm going in, he said. Vincent? Donovan's voice was flat with professional objection. I'm going in. You handle the street. He crossed without running. Running would draw attention in a way that a man walking with purpose did not. He pressed the buzzer for the 3rd floor and stood in the vestibule and waited. Nothing. He pressed it again. 30 seconds of silence and then a voice through the intercom. Tight, controlled, not Eleanor's voice, but he could hear Eleanor in the cadence of it, the watchfulness. Who is it? He hadn't prepared for this moment. He had spent 11 months preparing for the moment of finding her, and had not prepared for the moment of speaking to her for the first time in almost 2 years through an apartment intercom on a Tuesday night. It's Vincent, he said. The intercom went silent. He stood in the vestibule and breathed and waited, and the silence stretched long enough that he began to consider the specific humiliation of being refused entry to a building while his security team watched from the street. Then the door buzzed open. The stairs were narrow. He took them 3 flights without hurrying, or without appearing to hurry, and when he reached the 3rd floor landing, she was already in the doorway. Not open. The door was open 3 inches, held by a security chain, and Eleanor's face occupied the narrow space between door and frame. She looked at him with eyes that were not afraid and not warm, and not anything he could easily categorize. You look terrible, she said. I know. How did you find me? Investigator, 11 months, he paused. Eleanor, I need you to take Noah and come with me right now. I'll explain everything, but I need you to do it now. The eyes in the 3-inch gap did not move, did not blink. He had forgotten how she could go completely still when she was assessing something, how she could hold herself motionless while her mind worked at a speed her face never betrayed. Why? She said. Because there are people from the Salerno family in a car across the street, and my information reaching you tonight was leaked, and I need you and Noah somewhere I can guarantee is safe before I deal with the rest of it. A pause. How many? In the car, 2 that we can see. Donovan's outside? Of course she remembered Donovan. She had spent 11 years in this world. She knew the players. Yes. The door closed. He heard the chain come off. The door opened. Eleanor Sinclair. She was using her maiden name. He could see it on the mail stack on the small table inside the entrance. Was 34 years old and looked like someone who had spent the last 2 years doing exactly what she had set out to do, which was build a life that fit her without assistance. She was wearing dark jeans and a gray pullover, and her hair was shorter. She looked, he thought, like someone who had recently been sleeping before being woken up. She looked like someone who had not expected to need to be ready for this tonight, but who was, immediately and completely, ready for it. She looked like herself, concentrated, distilled. She looked to him like the thing he had thrown away. Noah is asleep, she said, turning back into the apartment. Give me 4 minutes. She gave him 3. She emerged from the hallway carrying a child who was boneless with sleep against her shoulder, dark-haired, one fist closed in the fabric of her pullover, face tilted toward her neck. Vincent stood in the center of the small, carefully arranged living room and looked at his son for the first time. There were no words for it. He had told himself there would be words, that he would find the right thing, that his decades of managing difficult rooms would serve him here. There were no words. There was only the specific, devastating reality of a face he recognized in the way you recognize something you've lost. The particular dark of the hair, the jaw, the stubborn tilt of a chin that was a direct genetic inheritance from 3 generations of Moretti men. Noah slept. Didn't know him. Didn't know anything about him. Was simply asleep on his mother's shoulder in a small apartment in Philadelphia, entirely innocent of what his existence had cost and what it was about to cost tonight. Let's go, Eleanor said. She didn't look at Vincent's face when she said it. She was already moving toward the door. They were on the stairs when Donovan's voice came through in Vincent's earpiece. The sedan moved. They're repositioning. Southeast corner. Vincent put his hand on Eleanor's arm. Light. A direction, not a grip. And steered her toward the back of the stairwell. Other way. She didn't ask questions. That was Eleanor. She took the information and moved. They came out through the building's rear into an alley that connected to the next block. 2 of Vincent's men were already there, positioned, which meant Donovan had anticipated this. Donovan had been doing this a long time. Noah woke up during the transfer to the car. He woke the way small children wake, suddenly, completely, with no intermediate state, and looked around at the dark alley and the strange men with the expression of a 14-month-old boy who has encountered something his framework does not yet cover. Then he looked at Vincent. He stared at Vincent with wide, dark, completely unafraid eyes. Vincent stared back. Up, Noah said, with the imperious brevity of someone who has recently discovered language and understands its power. Eleanor was buckling him into a car seat she had apparently grabbed from the apartment along with the bag over her shoulder, moving with the efficiency of a woman who had been practicing emergency readiness without knowing why, and she paused at the single word and looked at Vincent. He didn't know what his face was doing. He wasn't sure he had control of it. He says that to everyone, Eleanor said. And it was not unkind the way she said it, but it was a boundary, clear and clean and Eleanor. They drove. Donovan's team handled the sedan. Vincent didn't ask how. He sat in the back of the car across from Eleanor, who had Noah in her lap now, awake and studying his surroundings with the concentrated curiosity of a child in whom intelligence was already visible. How long have you known where I was? Eleanor said. 2 days. And you waited 2 days. I was trying to do it right. He watched her face. I was writing you a letter. Something moved in Eleanor's expression. Brief, unreadable, gone. A letter, she said. I know. Vincent Moretti was writing a letter. I know how it sounds. She looked down at Noah, who had found the zipper of her pullover and was operating it with deep professional interest. What did it say? I don't expect you to forgive me. He said it the way it had been on the page. Flat. No performance. That was the first line. I didn't finish it. Silence in the car. The highway moving outside the windows, the particular dark of interstate driving, the hum of the engine. Why are the Salernos involved? Eleanor said. He told her. All of it. Bianca, the investigation, the leak, the strategic logic of why Eleanor's location had been used as currency. He told it without softening it, because Eleanor had never needed things softened, and because she deserved, at minimum, the complete and unedited version of the disaster he had created and walked her into without her consent. She listened without interrupting. Noah had fallen back asleep against her chest. When Vincent finished, Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She used us, Eleanor said, me and Noah, as a move. Yes. We were a chess piece. Yes. Eleanor looked out the window. Her jaw was set. He recognized the jaw, had seen it in the mirror his entire life. He saw it in Noah's face, sleeping. Where are we going? Eleanor said. Somewhere safe, my property in Connecticut. It's clean, nothing associated with the organization, registered under a name nobody connects to me. I need 48 hours to close this. 48 hours, she repeated. Eleanor, don't. She said it quietly, not angry, just precise. Don't start making promises about timelines. You don't know what 48 hours looks like. She was right. He didn't argue. They reached the Connecticut property at 2 a.m. It was a house, not a compound. Deliberately ordinary, a large farmhouse on 12 acres, the kind of place that looked like someone's country retreat and was, in fact, an asset Vincent had held for a decade as a contingency he'd hoped never to activate. Eleanor carried Noah inside without asking for help. She found the bedroom, laid him down, stood for a moment looking at her son in the dark. Vincent stood in the doorway. There's a room at the end of the hall, he said quietly. I know how to find a room, she said, without turning around. He went back downstairs. He did not sleep. At 4 a.m, sitting at the kitchen table with his phone and a cold cup of coffee, Sutter finally called. Vincent picked up and said nothing. I'm sorry, Sutter said. His voice was wrong. Rough. They picked me up 2 days ago. I've been... A pause, a breath that sounded like it cost him something. I didn't give them Philadelphia. They already had Philadelphia. A silence. Then someone else in my operation. It doesn't matter now, Vincent said. Are you intact? More or less. Get somewhere clean. We'll talk tomorrow. He ended the call. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the cold coffee and listened to the house around him. The particular quiet of a house where a child was sleeping. A quality of silence he had never experienced in the penthouse. A silence that had weight and warmth and texture. Noah. His son was sleeping 30 feet above him. He put his face in his hands, not to cry. He was not going to cry at a kitchen table at 4 a.m. like a man in a movie. He just needed, for 30 seconds, to be somewhere his face didn't have to do anything. He had been so certain that finding Eleanor would be the hardest part. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Light, careful footsteps. Eleanor had always moved quietly, as if she understood that sound was something you could choose to take up or not. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in the gray pullover, barefoot on the kitchen tile, looking at him with the particular expression of someone who has been awake for a while. She sat down across from him without being asked. She looked at the cold coffee. I don't forgive you, she said. Conversational. Not cruel. I want to be clear about that before anything else happens. I know. Not for the affair. I'm past the affair. She folded her hands on the table. For the papers. For not reading them. Her voice remained even. 2 seconds. That's all it would have taken. To look at what you were signing. 2 seconds and you would have known, and whatever you decided to do with that information, at least you would have known. She paused. You didn't look. Because you didn't think what I did mattered enough to look. The kitchen was very quiet. That's correct, Vincent said. She looked at him. I know that's correct, he said. I've known it for 14 months. I'm not going to argue with an accurate assessment. He looked at his hands on the table. I signed away my son because I couldn't be bothered to read a document. There's no version of that I can make smaller than it is. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. He looks like you, she said finally. I know. It's actually annoying. The ghost of something, not quite humor but adjacent to it, moved across her face and disappeared. He has your temper too. Full sentences are still coming, but the stubbornness is already completely developed. Vincent said nothing. He was afraid that if he said the wrong thing, she would close again, and he had not had this version of Eleanor, this unguarded 4 a.m. version, in 2 years, and he was not going to waste it. He doesn't know about you, Eleanor said. He's too young to have asked. But it's coming that kids in his daycare have fathers, and he's starting to notice the pattern. She looked at the table. I wasn't going to lie to him. I want you to know that. Whatever I decided, I wasn't going to tell him his father was dead or didn't exist. What were you going to tell him? That his father was a complicated man who made a serious mistake and that the story wasn't finished yet. She looked up. That's still true. Yes, Vincent said. The story being unfinished doesn't mean I come back, she said. I need you to hear that separately from everything else. I'm not... She stopped, rearranged something inside herself visibly, the way she did when she was being precise about something that mattered. Whatever happens with Noah, with you knowing him, with you being his father in the real sense, that's one thing. What you and I were is a different thing, and that thing is over. I know, Vincent said. You say that. I know it. She studied him. Eleanor had always been able to study him in a way that felt like being taken apart carefully, all the components laid out on a surface and examined individually. You do know it, she said, as if confirming something she hadn't expected to confirm. She stood up. Get some sleep, she said. You look like something that's been left out in the weather. She went back upstairs. He sat at the kitchen table until the light began to change outside the windows, the dark going gray in the slow way of autumn mornings, and he thought about everything she had said and everything she hadn't said, and what it meant that she had come downstairs at 4 a.m. to say it. His phone buzzed at 6:15 Marco. He answered. Marco's voice was careful in the way it only got when he was holding something bad. The Salerno situation has developed. How? They're willing to talk. Back channel. This morning, through an intermediary, I trust. A pause. But there's a condition. There's always a condition. Vincent? Marco stopped. The condition is you, specifically your position. They want the restructure formalized. Territory, operations, the legal portfolio. They want it documented, and they want it binding. The kitchen was very still. They want me out, Vincent said. They want you diminished to the point of, yes, functionally, yes. Vincent looked out the kitchen window at the Connecticut morning coming in. Pale light, frost on the grass, the kind of quiet that had no equivalent in any city he had ever lived in. And if I refuse, then this doesn't end quietly, and you already know where the noise lands. He knew where the noise landed. It landed on Eleanor, on Noah, on the 48 hours he had promised and already couldn't guarantee, on the farmhouse in Connecticut and the carefully ordinary neighborhood in Philadelphia and the entire careful structure Eleanor had built for herself and her son. He put the phone down on the table without ending the call. He sat with both hands flat on the kitchen table and understood what was being asked of him and what it would cost and what it meant for every version of himself he had spent 30 years constructing. They were asking him to kneel, not metaphorically, not symbolically. They were asking him to sign over the empire he had built on blood and discipline and 30 years of never backing down to anyone, and to do it in writing, and to do it now. And the only alternative was a war that would consume everything, including the people sleeping upstairs. He had spent his entire adult life being the man who did not kneel. He had made that identity into a fortress and lived inside it and called it strength. Upstairs, a child's voice said something, a single word, unclear through the ceiling, the early morning vocalization of a boy waking up, testing the space around him. Vincent heard Eleanor respond, soft and immediate. He picked up the phone. Set the meeting, he said. His voice came out steady, which surprised him, though it probably shouldn't have. He had spent 30 years making his voice do things his body didn't feel. Vincent, if you walk into that meeting, set it, he said. Today. Whatever they need. He ended the call. He sat in the kitchen in the gray morning light and listened to his son moving around upstairs. The small sounds of a child beginning a day he knew nothing about, and understood with the terrible clarity of a man who has just made an irreversible choice that he was not the same person he had been yesterday. The man who had never bowed before anyone had just agreed to kneel, and the only reason he could live with it was standing 30 feet above him in a house she hadn't chosen, in a life that wasn't hers, holding a boy with Vincent's eyes who had said up to a stranger in a dark alley and meant it with his whole small body. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the base of the stairs and stood there, looking up at the landing where the light was on and the sounds of morning were happening. And he understood that whatever came next, the meeting, the documents, the surrender of everything he had built, the thing he was walking toward was more important than the thing he was walking away from. He had one more call to make before the morning was over. He made it standing at the bottom of the stairs, listening to his son's voice above him, and when the line connected, he said 4 words he had never said to anyone in 30 years of running an empire. "I need your help." The call lasted 11 minutes. Vincent stood at the base of the stairs in the gray Connecticut morning and spoke in a voice so quiet that anyone passing the kitchen doorway would not have heard him. He was not quiet because he was afraid. He was quiet because what he was saying was the kind of thing that lost its meaning if you performed it. It only counted if it was real, and real things didn't need volume. The man on the other end of the line was named Reyes. Deputy Director, a federal agency whose name Vincent had never spoken aloud in any room, he wasn't certain was clean. They had an arrangement of long standing, the kind that existed in the space between law and necessity, where governments and organizations like Vincent's occasionally found that their interests ran parallel for long enough to be useful to each other. Reyes had benefited from this arrangement in ways that had advanced his career considerably. Vincent had benefited in ways that had kept him operational through 3 separate federal investigations. The arrangement had never required Vincent to say those 4 words before. Reyes listened. Then Reyes said, "What do you need?" Vincent told him. When he ended the call, he stood in the hallway for a moment with the phone in his hand and looked at nothing in particular. A patch of wall, ordinary white paint, the kind of surface that asks nothing of you. He allowed himself 30 seconds of something that was not quite doubt and not quite fear, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Then he heard Noah's voice upstairs, and Eleanor's response, and the 30 seconds ended. He went to the kitchen and made coffee because the house had a coffee maker and ground coffee in the cabinet, and it was 6:30 in the morning, and the meeting with the Salernos was at noon, and he needed, before any of the rest of it, to be a person who had drunk coffee and stood in a kitchen and breathed. Eleanor came downstairs at 7 with Noah on her hip. Noah was wearing a shirt with a truck on it, and the expression of someone who has recently woken up and finds the world's continued existence mildly acceptable. He looked at Vincent across the kitchen with the same direct, unafraid stare from the previous night. "Who that?" Noah said. Eleanor set him down on the kitchen floor without ceremony. "That's someone Mama knows," she said, going to the coffee. Noah considered this answer with the critical faculty of a child who has not yet learned to accept insufficient explanations. He walked across the kitchen floor, walked, not toddled, a firm, purposeful walk that was already distinctly his own, and stopped in front of Vincent and looked up at him. He was so small. The specific smallness of a child was something Vincent had not prepared for. He had a nephew, had attended birthday parties, had existed in the vicinity of children before. But proximity to this particular child produced a physical sensation in his chest that he had no reference for, something between vertigo and an open wound. Noah reached up and grabbed Vincent's finger. Just grabbed it, with the unself-conscious confidence of someone who has not yet learned that the world might not cooperate with what you reach for. Vincent looked down at the small fist around his finger. He did not move. "He does that," Eleanor said from the counter, her back to them. Her voice was neutral in the way that meant it was costing her something to be neutral. "I know he does," Vincent said quietly, though he didn't know. He was just talking to have something to do with his mouth, while the rest of him was occupied with standing very still so that the small person holding his finger would not let go. They ate breakfast at the kitchen table. Eleanor had found eggs and bread, had moved through the unfamiliar kitchen with the adaptive efficiency of someone who has learned to function in whatever space is available. Noah ate toast in pieces and examined each piece before eating it, which was a behavior so specifically, precisely analytical that Vincent had to look at the table for a moment. He does that with everything, Eleanor said, watching Vincent's face. Inspects it first. I know where that comes from. I know you do. She looked at Noah. It was funny when I thought he'd only ever got it from me. It was the closest thing to a shared moment they had managed in 2 years, and it sat between them carefully, neither of them pushing it further than it went. At 8:30, Vincent's phone produced a text from Donovan. 2 words. Car ready. He looked at it. Eleanor was watching him. You're going somewhere, she said. Meeting at noon. The Salernos. Yes. She was quiet. Noah had climbed down from his chair and was investigating the cabinet under the sink with intense focus. Eleanor watched him for a moment, then looked at Vincent. What are you giving them? She said. He told her the outline. Not everything. Not the call to Reyes, not the specific terms, not the operational details that were not hers to carry, but the shape of it, the territory, the formal restructure, what it meant for the organization going forward. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, assembling the information into its architecture while he spoke. When he finished, she said, You're not telling me all of it. No. Does the part you're not telling me put you in a room with people who want to hurt you? A beat. Possibly. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Noah, who had successfully opened the cabinet and was now holding a colander and regarding it with deep professional satisfaction. He needs to know you, Eleanor said. Not to Vincent, not to the room, to herself maybe. Working it out. Whatever else is true, he needs to know his father. I've known that for a while. She paused. So you need to come back from this meeting. That's my intention. I'm not asking about your intention. I'm telling you. She met his eyes. Come back. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. Donovan drove. 2 vehicles again, 4 men in total, which was a fraction of what Vincent would normally bring to something like this. But the Salerno meeting had a protocol, and arriving with an army violated it in ways that would poison the room before anyone spoke. The meeting was in a restaurant in downtown Hartford that the Salerno family used for neutral conversations, a place they had chosen because it was equidistant from both territories and because the owner had been paying protection to both families for a decade and therefore had an invested interest in everyone remaining calm. Vincent sat in the back of the car and looked at the Connecticut countryside moving past the windows and thought about the meeting and didn't think about the meeting simultaneously, which was the particular dissociation of a man who is prepared for something so completely that the preparation is finished and now there is only the waiting. He thought about Noah and the colander. He thought about Eleanor saying come back with the flat, declarative certainty of someone issuing a correction rather than a request. He thought about the letter he had started. I don't expect you to forgive me. He hadn't finished it. He didn't know now whether it needed finishing. Some things got said eventually without letters, at kitchen tables at 4 a.m, or in exchanges about a boy who inspected his food before eating it. Some things said themselves. He was thinking about this when Donovan said, Vehicle behind us, 3rd car back. It was on Route 44 when we got on Route 44. Vincent adjusted his posture without looking back. How long? Since we left the property. Salerno? Possibly someone else. Someone else meaning Bianca moved more pieces than we've accounted for. Donovan's voice was flat, professional, the voice of a man who has been managing bad situations for 2 decades. There are people she talked to who we haven't identified yet. Vincent thought about this. Don't lose them, he said. I want to know who they are before noon. If they're still on us when we reach Hartford, handle it, quietly. Donovan made a call. They reached Hartford at 10:40. The tail was identified at 10:52, 2 men in a rented Ford, neither of them connected to the Salerno family, whose faces Donovan's people ran through a system that should not have been accessible to a private security operation but was. They were connected to a name Vincent knew, a man named Petrov, who operated on the eastern edge of the city in the import business loosely, and who had an arrangement with Bianca that predated her involvement with the Moretti organization, and that Vincent was only now, this morning, understanding the scope of. Bianca had not been working for the Salerno family, or not only for the Salerno family. She had been the connective tissue between 2 separate interests who had both identified the same vulnerability in the Moretti operation and had been working from different angles toward the same outcome, the outcome being Vincent removed. "She played all of us," Donovan said, not admiringly, just accurately. "Yes," Vincent said. "Petrov's people will be at the meeting." "I know." "Vincent." "I know." He checked his watch. 11:15. "There's nothing to do about it now except walk in and see what's in the room." Donovan looked at him in the rearview mirror with the expression of a man who has followed another man into difficult situations for 17 years and has learned that the difficult situations never stop being difficult, only the threshold of acceptable risk changes. "You're still going in," Donovan said. "Yes." "Even knowing Petrov's people will be there. If I don't go in, the alternative is worse." Vincent straightened his jacket. "Park on the south side. Keep the engine running." The restaurant was called Mancini's, which was not the owner's name but the name of the family that had owned the space before him and whose reputation he had bought along with the lease. It smelled like garlic and old wood and the specific accumulated atmosphere of a room that had hosted many conversations no one wanted recorded. Vincent had been here twice before. He knew the layout, the back room, the table with the corner sightlines, the exit through the kitchen. He knew, walking in, that the table would be arranged in a way that gave the Salernos the corner and left him with his back at an angle. He knew it and walked in anyway. There were 5 men in the back room. 3 Salernos. Dom Salerno himself, which was unexpected and significant, a man in his 60s with the build of someone who had once been physically formidable and still carried the memory of it in his posture. Beside him, his son Richie, who was 35, and had his father's instincts filtered through a volatility the old man had never possessed. And a lawyer Vincent didn't recognize, which meant a lawyer who had been brought specifically for this, not a regular family counsel. The 4th man was from Petrov's organization. Vincent recognized him, a man called Gregor who had been Petrov's interface with various operations across the city for years. His presence was the confirmation, if confirmation was needed, that what Vincent had suspected in the car was accurate. The 5th man made Vincent stop moving, just for a half step, barely perceptible. He recovered it immediately and crossed the remaining distance to the table and sat down with the composed deliberateness of a man who has not just had the floor shift under him. The 5th man was Carmine Esposito. Carmine, who had been with Vincent's father. Carmine, who had sat at Vincent's right hand for 19 years. Carmine, who had come to the Connecticut house last night with the face of a man delivering terrible news to someone he cared about. Carmine, who was sitting on the wrong side of this table. Carmine looked at Vincent and did not look away. Whatever he was, whatever he had done and been doing, he was not a man who looked away. "Vincent," Dom Salerno said, the greeting of a man who is enjoying the room. "Dom." Vincent sat, put his hands on the table where they could be seen, a protocol of respect that also happened to communicate that he was not currently holding anything. "I see we have a full house." "Mr. Esposito has been helpful to us," Dom said. "We thought his presence would clarify certain things." "What things?" "The terms." Dom opened his hands, the gesture of a reasonable man. "We want this to go smoothly, Vincent. Nobody wants theater. You've had a long run. The city respects what you built. But the city changes." Richie Salerno leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, the posture of someone demonstrating that he is relaxed because he holds all the cards and knows it. Gregor said nothing. Gregor was there to witness. Carmine said nothing either. He looked at Vincent with the steady gaze of a man who has done what he has done and made his peace with it, or was pretending to. Vincent looked at Carmine for a moment. Just a moment. Then he looked at Dom. "Walk me through the terms," Vincent said. Dom nodded to the lawyer who opened a folder and began speaking in the measured cadence of a man who has been paid to make hostile documents sound procedural. The territory restructure. The legitimate portfolio. The real estate, the construction interests, the financial instruments, transferred to a holding company with shared oversight. The remaining operational elements of the Moretti organization folded into the Salerno structure as a subsidiary, retaining the name for transitional purposes but with revised leadership. Revised leadership meaning Carmine. Vincent listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not visibly react. He had known the shape of this before he walked in. He had known that Carmine was likely compromised, had suspected it since the night in Connecticut, had felt the wrongness of Carmine's presence at the property without being able to fully name it in the middle of everything else. He had known that the terms would be thorough, because this had been planned over a long period by people who were good at planning. What they hadn't planned for was Reyes. Vincent waited until the lawyer finished. Then he said, "I have a counterproposal." Dom smiled, which was the smile of a man who has heard a condemned person ask for a different sentence. "Vincent?" "1 minute," Vincent said. "Give me 1 minute." He put his phone on the table. He opened the message thread with Reyes. He turned the phone so Dom could read the screen. Dom's smile didn't disappear immediately. It went through a process. The reading, the recognition of what he was reading, the understanding of what the words on the screen meant operationally and legally, and in terms of what the morning now looked like compared to what it had looked like 30 seconds ago. Richie leaned forward to look at the phone. Gregor looked at it and stood up. Carmine looked at it and went still. On the screen was a message from Reyes. 3 sentences. The specific, unambiguous sentences of a man who had, over the previous 4 hours, done what he had agreed in 11 minutes of quiet phone conversation to do. Assembled a package of federal oversight so precise and so thoroughly documented that any move against the Moretti organization in the next 72 hours would trigger an automatic investigative mechanism that would expose, with the specificity of a scalpel, the financial infrastructure of every organization at this table, the Salernos, Petrov's operation, and everything Carmine had been building on the side for longer than Vincent had known to look. "This goes live in 60 minutes unless I make a call," Vincent said. "That's how it's structured. If I'm not able to make that call, it goes live automatically." The room was very quiet. Dom Salerno had been running an organization for 30 years. He had survived things. He understood, looking at the phone, that he was looking at a man who had walked into this room already knowing what was in it, who had spent the morning not panicking but building a structure specifically calibrated for this moment. "You were never going to sign the transfer," Dom said. "I was going to sign something," Vincent said. "I still am. I came here to make a deal, Dom. I just came here to make one that I wrote." Richie was on his feet. "This is—" "Sit down, Richard." Dom said it quietly. The authority of a man who has been managing his son's volatility for 35 years. Richie sat. Dom looked at Vincent, the look of a man reassessing something, taking inventory. "What do you want?" Dom said. "Bianca Romano, where she is and what she's currently doing on your behalf. That stops today, with documentation." Vincent's voice hadn't changed in temperature or speed throughout any of this. He was talking the way he had talked in 100 rooms over 30 years. "Petrov's interface with my former operations, Gregor can explain it to you since he's here, that ends today with an accounting. And Carmine," he looked at Carmine for the second time, the sustained look this time, the one with weight. "Carmine walks out of this room with me. Whatever arrangement he's made with you is concluded." "Carmine came to us," Dom said. "That was his choice." "I know it was his choice." Vincent didn't look away from Carmine. "I'm making a different offer." Carmine's face was stone, the particular stone of a man who built it that way because the alternative was something he couldn't afford. "Why?" Carmine said. His voice was rough, the first word he'd spoken. "Because you were with my father," Vincent said, "and because whatever you decided and why you came to Connecticut last night, you could have not come. You came anyway." A pause. "That matters." Something moved in Carmine's face, brief, undefended. "The 60 minutes, Dom said. 54 minutes now, Vincent said. Dom looked at the lawyer. The lawyer looked at the documents in the folder, which were now, in the recontextualized room, instruments with different implications than they'd had when the meeting started. Dom looked at Gregor. Gregor said, in the flat accent of a man who has survived long enough to recognize when a room has turned, "Petrov will want certain assurances. Petrov can have certain assurances. When I hear from him directly." Vincent looked at Gregor. "He knows my number." Dom Salerno looked at the phone on the table, looked at Vincent, looked at his son, who was sitting with his arms crossed in the furious compact energy of someone who has been in this room long enough to understand he was not going to get what he came for, but has not yet made peace with it. You came in here ready to lose everything, Dom said. I came in here ready to make a different kind of deal than the one you offered. Vincent picked up the phone. I'm willing to give you things, real things. Territory I'm not using efficiently, operations that would serve you better than they serve me, introductions in the legitimate sector that would benefit both of us. I'm willing to sit at a table with you and work through it like men who are going to be in the same city for another 20 years. He held Dom's gaze. But I'm not signing a document that takes my name off what I built, and I'm not doing it at a table where the man who was with my father is sitting on your side. The room held the particular silence of a decision being made. Dom Salerno reached over and closed the lawyer's folder. The sound of it was very small in the quiet room, a soft, definitive sound. We'll talk, Dom said. They talked for 2 hours. The documents that emerged from those 2 hours were not the documents the Salerno family had brought to the table. They were not the documents Vincent had hoped to produce when he had imagined this meeting from the Connecticut farmhouse at 4 a.m. They were the documents that two organizations produce when neither one has destroyed the other and both are too tired and too realistic to pretend they can. Compromise. Operational, territorial, sustainable. Vincent signed them at 1:47 in the afternoon. He called Reyes at 1:48. Stand it down, he said. Done, Reyes said. We're even. Yes, Vincent said. We are. He and Carmine walked out of Mancini's together, which was not something Vincent had planned and which took from Carmine a visible act of something that was not quite courage and not quite surrender, but existed in the space between the two. They stood on the sidewalk in the cold Hartford afternoon. Carmine looked at the street. I thought the organization was finished, he said. After the Bianca situation, after the Salerno pressure started building, I thought you were finished and He stopped. I made a decision about where to be when it fell. And now, Carmine looked at him. You didn't let it fall. No, I didn't think you had it in you. He said it without cruelty, just accurately. I thought the searching, the Eleanor situation, the boy, I thought it had taken you out of the game. It did, Vincent said. That's not what I mean when I say it's still in me. Carmine looked at him for a long moment. She have the boy with her? He said. Somewhere safe? Yes. Carmine nodded, the nod of a man filing something away. Good, he said. Donovan pulled the car to the curb. Vincent got in. He looked at his watch. 3:15 in the afternoon. He had told Eleanor 48 hours. He had managed the meeting, constructed a working peace, neutralized the immediate operational threat to the Connecticut property, and stood in a room with Carmine Esposito without doing what the old version of himself would have done to a man who had sat on the wrong side of a table. There were things still unresolved. Bianca, still out there, her operational network still partially intact. Petrov, who would call eventually and who Vincent was ready for. The deeper restructure of his own organization, which would take months and which would require him to make decisions about what he was willing to let go. Not today. Today, he had one task left. He looked at Donovan. Take me back. They drove north in the fading afternoon light, through the Connecticut countryside, going gold and late, and Vincent sat with his phone in his hand and didn't call Eleanor because what he needed to tell her was not phone conversation. He thought about what the morning had cost, what the deal had cost, what the version of himself that had walked into Mancini's 2 hours ago was willing to put on the table. Not just the operational concessions, not just the territory, but something older and harder than that. The certainty. The absolute load-bearing certainty of a man who had always known exactly who he was and what he would and wouldn't do. He had walked into that room uncertain. He had never walked into a room uncertain before, not once in 30 years. And the uncertainty had not destroyed him. It had produced instead something more flexible and more precise than certainty ever had. The ability to read the room without the noise of his own invulnerability getting in the way. Eleanor had been trying to tell him something like that for 11 years. He hadn't been able to hear it until he had lost her completely. They reached the property at 4:40. Donovan stopped the car. Vincent got out and stood in the driveway in the cold afternoon and looked at the house. The kitchen light was on. Through the window he could see the shape of Eleanor at the counter, the particular set of her shoulders, the way she moved in a kitchen. Efficient, deliberate, like she'd already worked out the optimal path before she started. He could hear, through the cracked window that let the cold air in, Noah's voice, talking to himself, or to a toy, or to Eleanor. The continuous small narrative of a child processing the world, labeling it, asking it questions it couldn't yet answer. Vincent stood in the driveway and listened. He was a man who had signed documents that changed the shape of his empire this afternoon. He was a man who had knelt to nothing and negotiated with everything. He was a man who had spent 30 years building a fortress and had spent this morning, deliberately and with full understanding of what it meant, opening several of the doors. And he was standing in a driveway listening to his son talk to himself in the kitchen of a house that wasn't theirs. In a life that hadn't been planned, in a world that had rearranged itself around a prenatal document he had never been meant to read. He started toward the door. Inside the kitchen, Noah heard the footstep on the porch step. That specific Vincent Moretti footstep, heavy and deliberate, and looked up from the floor where he was sitting with a wooden spoon Eleanor had given him to keep him occupied. He looked at the door, then he looked at Eleanor. "Man," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "The man is back." And the door opened. The door opened, and Vincent stepped into the kitchen, and the warmth of it hit him first. Not the temperature, though the house was warm against the October cold outside, but the specific quality of warmth that belongs to a room where someone has been cooking and a child has been present, and the ordinary machinery of an ordinary evening has been running in the background of an extraordinary day. Noah looked at him from the floor with the wooden spoon in both hands. Eleanor looked at him from the counter with nothing in her hands, having gone still the way she went still when she was reading something. She was reading him, the way she always had. The coat, the posture, the particular way he was holding himself after 4 hours in a room that had required everything he had. "You're in one piece," she said, "more or less." She looked at him for another moment, confirming the assessment. Then she turned back to the counter. "Sit down. There's food in 20 minutes. He sat at the kitchen table. Noah considered him from the floor, then stood up and walked to the table and held the wooden spoon up toward Vincent with the expression of someone making an offering. Vincent took it. Noah looked satisfied, turned around, and walked back to the center of the floor and sat down again with nothing, apparently content to have redistributed the spoon. Eleanor, at the counter, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "What was that?" Vincent said. "He does that with things he likes," she said. "Gives them to you. It's a compliment." Vincent looked at the wooden spoon in his hand. He set it on the table carefully. They ate at the kitchen table. Pasta. Simple. Eleanor had found what the pantry offered and made something out of it the way she made something out of everything. Noah ate with the focused intensity of a child who takes food seriously, occasionally offering pieces of his dinner to Vincent with the same ceremonial gravity as the spoon, and Vincent accepted each piece because he understood somehow, instinctively, that refusing would be a social error of significance. After dinner, Eleanor put Noah to bed. Vincent sat at the kitchen table and listened to her voice upstairs. Low, continuous, the particular cadence of a parent putting a child down, a sound with its own specific music. He had missed every version of this, every night of it, from the beginning. He sat with that and didn't put it anywhere else. She came downstairs 40 minutes later. She poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from him and pushed 1 glass to his side of the table. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it this time. The full meeting, Carmine, the terms, the Reyes mechanism, and how he had structured it, the deal that had come out of 2 hours in the back room of a Hartford restaurant that smelled like garlic, and 40 years of other people's difficult conversations. She listened to the whole thing without speaking. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She turned the water glass in her hands, small rotation, thinking. "Carmine," she said. "Yes." "You walked him out." "Yes." She absorbed this. Why? He had been thinking about how to answer that since Hartford. He had the honest answer, and he had several versions of the answer that sounded better than the honest one, and he was done with those. "Because I understood something this morning that I've been too proud to understand for 30 years, he said. "That the people around me make choices based on what they think I am, what they think I'm capable of. And if what I am is only ever the man who doesn't forgive, if that's the only thing available, then the choices they make are going to reflect that. He paused. Carmine decided I was finished and made arrangements accordingly. He wasn't wrong to think I might be. I've given people reason to think that. He looked at the table. I'm trying to give them different reasons. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. That's different, she said quietly. From what? From how you used to talk. Not a compliment, not a criticism, an observation. Eleanor made a lot of those. I've had time to think, he said. About 14 months of it. She nodded slowly. What happens now, she said, with the organization? Restructure. The violent operations. I'm dismantling most of them. The Hartford deal requires it of some, but I'd already been thinking about it. The legitimate portfolio can sustain what's left. It takes 2 years, maybe 3, but it's possible. He looked at her. I want Noah to inherit something with my name on it that he doesn't have to be ashamed of. Eleanor was quiet. That's not for you to decide yet, she said finally. What he inherits. What he knows about where it came from. She paused. He's 15 months old. I know. You have time to build toward that. You don't have to solve it tonight. I know, he said again. She looked at him with those careful, direct eyes. You're not going to solve everything tonight, Vincent. I know, Eleanor. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. Something smaller, more internal than that. The thing her mouth did when she was acknowledging something she hadn't expected to acknowledge. Good, she said. Then drink your water. He drank his water. They stayed at the Connecticut property for 3 more days, while Donovan managed the operational fallout in New York. The implementation of the Hartford terms, the quiet communications that needed to go out to the various parties who had been holding their breath waiting for the aftermath of whatever had happened in that restaurant. Vincent worked from the farmhouse kitchen table, which was not ideal and which he found, to his surprise, less constraining than it should have been. He spent mornings with Noah. This was not planned. It emerged the way things emerge around small children. Because Noah woke early, and Vincent woke early, and Eleanor, who had been running on compressed adrenaline for 72 hours, slept until 8, and because Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:30 on the second morning and looked at Vincent with the expectant expression of someone who has identified a resource. Vincent made oatmeal. He had not made oatmeal in his adult life, but the instructions were on the container and he followed them with the same methodical attention he applied to legal documents, and Noah ate it with the focused appreciation of a child who does not complicate his relationship with breakfast. They developed a morning protocol without discussing it. Noah ate. Vincent drank coffee. Noah narrated things. The bowl, the spoon, the window, the bird that appeared on the fence outside. Each item receiving its label with the satisfied authority of someone cataloging the world. Vincent responded when responses were appropriate and was quiet when quiet was appropriate, and he learned over those 3 mornings the specific rhythm of his son's attention, how long it held, how it shifted, what produced delight, and what produced the furrowed, concentrated inspection face. The inspection face. On the second morning, watching Noah examine a leaf he had brought in from outside with that particular Moretti concentration, Vincent thought about the prenatal document in his desk drawer in New York, about the date on it, about the 30 seconds in which he had signed everything away. He thought about it without the self-laceration he had been carrying for 14 months, not because it had stopped mattering, but because sitting across from this child, watching him dismantle a leaf with focused intelligence, the accounting of past errors felt less important than the accounting of present ones. He was here now. He could be here now, or he could spend the time being here grieving the time he hadn't been, and those were 2 different choices. He chose the former. On the 3rd afternoon, Eleanor came to find him in the small side room he'd been using as an office. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, not defensively, just the posture she took when she was working up to something, and he looked up from his laptop and waited. I'm going back to Philadelphia, she said. He had known it was coming, had known since the first morning, knowing it didn't make the room feel any different than it felt. When? He said. Tomorrow. I need to get back to work. Noah's daycare. She paused. My life. Yes. She looked at him. I'm not. She stopped, rearranged the sentence. What we talked about the other night. That's still true. I know. I need you to hear it again, because I know you." Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who knows exactly what they are dealing with and has decided to deal with it honestly. "You came back yesterday. You handled everything. You sat in my kitchen for 3 days and you were good with Noah, and I can see what you're building toward in your head. I know how you think. Then you know I'm not—" "You're not going to push," she said. "I believe that. Right now, in this moment, you mean it." She looked at the window. "But you're Vincent Moretti, and you've wanted things your entire life, and you've gotten them, and some part of you is going to look at the last 3 days and start running the calculation. And I need you to hear me when I tell you that this isn't a negotiation." He sat with that. "What is it then?" he said. "It's a life," she said. "Mine, that I built. That I'm not giving up because the circumstances changed." She met his eyes. "You can be Noah's father, a real one. I want that. He needs that. But there are two separate things here, and they need to stay separate." The room was quiet. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "Not as a strategy," he said. "Not as an opening position." "Okay." Something in her shoulders changed, fractionally. The small readjustment of a person who has been braced for a different conversation and can now put the brace down. "Okay," she said. She started to turn back to the doorway. "Eleanor." She stopped. He stood up from the desk. He had a thing he needed to say, and there was no version of it that wasn't complicated, so he said it simply. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. Not for the reason that I lost something. For the reason that you deserved better than what I gave you. The affair, the papers, the fact that you had to pack bags in secret and leave in the middle of the night and rebuild your entire life from nothing because staying had become something you couldn't do." He held her gaze. "You deserved better. I know that's insufficient. I'm saying it anyway." Eleanor looked at him for a long time. The afternoon light was coming through the side window, the flat golden light of October, and it caught the side of her face and made her look for a moment like the woman he had married in a ceremony 11 years ago in a room full of people who had no idea what kind of man they were watching. "I know you're sorry," she said. "I've known it for a while." She paused. "Knowing it doesn't change what happened, but I know it." She went back upstairs. He stood in the small office room with the laptop open and the afternoon light on the floor and breathed through the specific pain of being forgiven for exactly what you did and nothing more, which is the only honest kind of forgiveness, and also the hardest kind to receive because it doesn't come with absolution, only with acknowledgement. He had asked for forgiveness. She had given him something more honest than that. She had given him the truth. They drove back to Philadelphia the next morning. Vincent's car followed Eleanor's. She drove herself, which he had expected, which was so entirely Eleanor that it almost made him smile. He followed at a distance that was present without being intrusive, which was the specific geometry he was going to have to learn to maintain. They reached her building at noon. He helped carry things up. The bag, the car seat, the accumulated small equipment of a life with a small child. Noah fell asleep in the car and woke on the stairs and looked around at the familiar walls of his own building with the deep satisfaction of a child returning to known territory. "Home," Noah said. "Home," Eleanor confirmed. At the door she turned and looked at Vincent. "Saturday," she said. He waited. "If you want to come on Saturday, we go to the park on Saturday mornings when it's not raining." She said it the way she said most things, as a fact, not an invitation requiring an elaborate response. "Noah likes the ducks." Vincent looked at his son, who was already inside the apartment and had gone directly to something on the floor that required immediate investigation. "What time?" he said. 9. "I'll be here." She nodded. "Don't bring the cars," she said, "or if you have to, park them on the next block. We're regular people at the park." "Understood." She almost said something else. He could see it. Some further instruction, some additional clarification. Then she let it go. "Saturday?" she said. She went inside. He stood on the landing and listened to the door close and then to the sounds on the other side of it. Noah's voice, Eleanor's response, the ordinary return of two people to their home. He stood there for a moment longer than was necessary, not because he was hoping the door would open again, but because he needed to feel the specific weight of this. The particular specific shape of what he had. He had Saturday. He had a boy who gave wooden spoons to people he liked, and inspected leaves and said, "Home with the conviction of someone who knows exactly where they belong." He had, from the woman who had every reason to give him nothing, the precise and carefully proportioned access of a man who had demonstrated over the course of 4 days in Connecticut that he could be trusted with it. It was not what he had imagined, standing in his office 14 months ago with a prenatal document in his shaking hands. It was not the version of things his pride had constructed. Eleanor returning, the family reconstituted, the empire intact. It was not the story his arrogance had always assumed would eventually resolve in his favor. It was smaller than that, and it was real. He went downstairs. Bianca was arrested 6 weeks later on federal charges that Reyes's office had been building for 8 months. The Salerno connection, the financial instruments, the information brokering. The charges were specific and heavily documented. Vincent did not assist in the prosecution and did not obstruct it. He had no further communication with her. Whatever she was, whatever she had done, she had taught him something he might not have learned otherwise about the difference between proximity and loyalty, between a person who wants to be near power and a person who simply stays. He filed that distinction and moved forward. Petrov called in November. The conversation was civil, transactional, and concluded with an arrangement that suited both parties and that Vincent had no illusions would last forever. He was not building for forever anymore. He was building for 5 years, 10, manageable increments, the kind of timeline you calibrate when you have started thinking about what comes after you. Carmine came back, not immediately, and not without a conversation that neither of them wanted and both of them needed. It happened in Vincent's office in December, late afternoon, the kind of gray winter light that makes rooms feel smaller and more honest. Carmine sat across the desk and said what he had done and why, in plain language, without asking for anything. Vincent listened without interrupting. When Carmine finished, Vincent said what he had already said in Hartford about the different reasons he was trying to give people, and then told Carmine what role was available, which was smaller than the one he'd held before and larger than nothing. Carmine took it. They did not discuss it further. They went back to work. The restructure took 22 months. It was not clean. It was never going to be clean. There was no clean version of dismantling the violent infrastructure of an organization built over 3 decades. No smooth surgical procedure for extracting the parts that could not survive into the legitimate world. There were losses. There were men who didn't understand what was happening and resisted it. And Vincent handled each of those conversations individually, because he had decided, in the farmhouse kitchen, watching his son catalog a leaf, that he was not going to build the next version of this organization on the same foundation as the last one. Fear was efficient. He had always known that. Fear got compliance fast. Fear was the shortest distance between a decision and an outcome. But fear had also produced Bianca. Fear had produced captains who told him what he wanted to hear and made other arrangements when his attention was elsewhere. Fear had produced an organization so dependent on the specific gravity of his persona that the moment he showed any human weight, the searching, the Elena situation, the boy, the whole structure had begun to wobble. He was building something more expensive and slower than fear. He was building a reason for people to stay. He got there, eventually, imperfectly, with the specific imperfection of things built by a flawed man who has run out of excuses not to try. Saturday mornings became the fixed point of his week. The park, 9 o'clock. Whatever the weather allowed. In November, they'd stayed 20 minutes because the cold was aggressive, and Noah had looked at the ducks with the expression of someone making a philosophical complaint. In December, they'd brought better coats. By January, they had a bench they considered theirs, near the pond, facing east, with a good sightline to the path where Noah walked ahead of them, with the purposeful independence of a child who is not yet 2, but has very clear opinions about direction. Eleanor walked beside Vincent on those mornings. Not close. The distance of 2 people who have found a new arrangement and are learning its dimensions. They talked about Noah, primarily. His emerging language, the daycare situation, a new habit of stacking things that suggested either architectural ambition or the compulsion for order that ran in both their bloodlines. They talked about other things sometimes. Her work, she had been promoted in the spring, was managing projects with a precision that her colleagues apparently found both admirable and mildly intimidating, which made complete sense to Vincent. His work, the restructure, the legitimate portfolio, a construction project in Newark that was genuinely clean and that he found, to his surprise, satisfying in a way the other work had rarely been. They did not talk about what they had been. There was no need to. What they had been was in the air between them, in the fact of the child walking ahead of them, in the specific, careful way they moved near each other, aware without leaning. Some things don't need narrating, they just need to be carried. Noah turned 2 in the spring. Eleanor organized a small gathering. 6 children from daycare, their parents, a cake with a truck on it that Noah regarded with profound approval before destroying it with both hands. Vincent arrived with a wrapped gift, parked on the next block, wore nothing that suggested convoy or organization. He stood in Eleanor's apartment, which he was seeing for the first time in daylight, and noticed the things she had put on the walls: framed prints, a city map, a photograph of herself and Noah on a beach somewhere that had the quality of a memory she wanted to keep visible. He noticed the books on the shelf arranged by height, which was Eleanor. He noticed that the kitchen was organized with a logic that was immediately apparent if you understood how she thought, which he did. He noticed that the apartment was entirely her, entirely built from her own choices and her own resources and her own particular way of understanding what a life should feel like. He stood in it carefully, the way you stand in a thing that doesn't belong to you. Noah found him by the window and climbed his leg with the complete physical confidence of a child who has decided your body is available terrain. "Up," Noah said. Vincent picked him up. Noah examined the window from the new elevation, pointed at a pigeon on the fire escape. "Bird," he said. "Bird," Vincent confirmed. "Mine," Noah said, with the serene acquisitiveness of a child who has recently discovered ownership as a concept. "Sure," Vincent said. Eleanor appeared at his elbow with a piece of cake on a plate. She handed it to him without making it a moment. He took it without making it a moment. They stood at the window with the boy between them, not literally between them, Noah was on Vincent's arm, and watched the pigeon on the fire escape until it lost interest in whatever it had been investigating and lifted off into the April sky. "He thinks everything outside windows is his," Eleanor said. "He gets that from somewhere. He gets a lot of things from somewhere." She looked at Noah, who was tracking the pigeon's departure with intense focus. "He's going to be a handful. Also from somewhere." The ghost of something moved across her face, real this time, not suppressed. It lasted half a second. Then she took a piece of cake from the plate in his hand without asking and went back to her other guests, and Vincent stood at the window with his son and the departing pigeon and what remained of the cake. The city charity event happened in October, 2 years after Hartford. It was a Children's Foundation gala that Eleanor attended in her professional capacity. Her firm had donated to the foundation's new community center project. Vincent attended because he was on the foundation board, a position he had taken 6 months earlier as part of the legitimate restructure. They had not coordinated attendance. Neither of them had known the other would be there. Noah was not present. He was with Eleanor's sister that evening. They found each other in the crowd with the inevitability of 2 people who are attuned to each other's location in a room, a skill that does not go away simply because the relationship that produced it has changed form. Eleanor was in a dark blue dress. Her hair was up. She was talking to a woman from the foundation's board with the contained, attentive energy she brought to professional situations, present, engaged, slightly formal, in the way of someone who has learned to calibrate how much of herself she offers to which rooms. She saw him across the room. She did not look away quickly. She did not do anything demonstrative. She simply acknowledged him with the specific acknowledgement they had developed over 2 years of Saturday mornings. A small, direct recognition between 2 people who know each other completely and have agreed on the terms. He crossed the room. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. "Board member," he said. "Since February." "I know, I just didn't—" She stopped. "I didn't put it together." They stood in the room with the event happening around them and looked at each other in the way of 2 people who have arrived, through very different routes, at the same point in the same room, and are sorting out what that means. "You look well," he said. "So do you." She said it with the particular cadence of something true. "Better than 2 years ago." Significantly. "The beard is new. Noah said I looked like a bird without it." Eleanor blinked. Then she laughed. A real one, unguarded. The laugh he had heard maybe 40 times in 11 years of marriage because she held it carefully, and it was exactly what it had always been. Sudden and genuine and gone quickly, like a window opened and closed. The room went on around them. Somewhere a string quartet was playing something that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The foundation's executive director was working the room with the practiced warmth of someone who has learned to make money feel like generosity. The city's notable people were doing the city's notable things. Vincent and Eleanor stood slightly apart from all of it, in the specific pocket of quiet they had always been able to create around themselves, and were two people who had been through something enormous and had come out the other side of it into something smaller and harder and more real. "I've been thinking about something," Eleanor said. He waited. "Noah's going to ask," she said. "Soon. He's putting things together. He understands that other kids have fathers who live with them, and he has a father who comes on Saturdays, and the math on that is going to come due." She paused. "I want to be ready. I want us to be ready." "What do you want to tell him?" She looked at her glass. "The truth. Age appropriate, but the truth. That his parents were married, and that it didn't work, and that both of his parents love him, and that the story of why things are the way they are is complicated in ways he'll understand more as he gets older." She looked up. "And that his father is trying." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "That's accurate," he said. "I know it's accurate." She met his eyes. "I want him to know it." The string quartet shifted to something slower. Someone near the windows laughed at something. "I can be there when you tell him," Vincent said. "If you want." Eleanor considered it. "Yes," she said. "I think that's right." They stood in the room a little longer, not saying much. There was less that needed saying than there had been 2 years ago, which was a kind of progress. The quieting of the things that had needed to be said until they'd been said, and what remained was just the two of them, which was simpler and also more complicated than everything that had preceded it. "I should get back," Eleanor said eventually. "Of course." She started to move, stopped. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. "For what?" he said. "For the last 2 years." She said it simply. "For showing up on Saturdays, for the way you are with him." She paused. "For becoming someone I don't have to protect him from." He held that. "That should have been the baseline," he said. "Yes," she said. "It should have." And because she was Eleanor, because she had always been the person who said the accurate thing and let it be accurate, she didn't add anything to soften it. She just let it stand. She walked back into the room. He watched her go. The particular way she moved through a crowd, self-contained, purposeful, making no more claim on the space than she needed. He watched her until she reached the woman from the foundation board she'd been talking to before, watched her re-enter the conversation with the smooth attentiveness of someone who had not just had a significant exchange in the corner of a room, and he understood watching her that this was the thing he had always underestimated. Not her intelligence, not her precision or her self-possession or her capacity to survive things, her fundamental completeness. Eleanor Sinclair had never needed him to be whole. She had wanted him, had loved him, genuinely and fully, in the years when there had been something to love, but she had never needed him. And the distinction between those two things, which he had spent the entirety of their marriage failing to understand, was the reason she had been able to pack 2 bags in advance and call an attorney at midnight and rebuild an entire life in another city without asking anyone for permission. She was whole without him, and she had built a whole life for their son. And he was being allowed into that life, incrementally, at a pace she controlled, because she had decided, based on evidence he was still accumulating, that he could be trusted with it. That was what he had. That was the full accounting. He was not the man who had signed those papers. He was not the man who had stood at his penthouse window and watched the city with the confidence of someone who owned it and would always own it. That man had been real, and he had built real things, and he had also thrown away the realest thing he had in 30 seconds of arrogance that cost 6 years. He was the man at the park bench at 9 on Saturday mornings. He was the man who made oatmeal from the instructions on the container. He was the man who received wooden spoons as compliments and accepted pieces of toddler dinner with appropriate gravity. He was the man who had walked into a Hartford restaurant, ready to lose everything, and had walked out with something smaller and more durable than victory. He was the man trying. He finished his water. He stayed for the rest of the event, made the conversations that needed to be made, and left at 10 o'clock through the front entrance into the October city. The street was cold and bright with it. He walked 2 blocks before his car found him. He'd asked them to stay loose, not to follow close, because he'd needed the 2 blocks. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He thought about Noah, asleep at Eleanor's sister's apartment, with the truck shirt and the duck obsession and the habit of giving away the things he liked to people he liked, which was the most generous impulse in the world expressed with the complete unself-consciousness of someone who had not yet learned to protect himself from disappointment. He was going to teach him about that eventually, about the world and its specific willingness to disappoint. He was not going to lie to the boy about what it cost to be alive and want things. But not yet. For now, Noah walked ahead of them on Saturday mornings and pointed at birds and said mine with his whole chest. And the world cooperated because the world does cooperate with that kind of certainty in the brief and irreplaceable window before it teaches you otherwise. And Vincent was going to be there for as much of that window as Eleanor and time and his own continued effort would allow. He got in the car. "Home," he said. The driver pulled out into the city. Vincent looked out the window at New York moving past. The restaurants, the couples, the ordinary population of a city doing ordinary things on an ordinary Friday night, and felt none of the ownership he had once felt looking at it. Not loss, either. Something quieter than either. He had spent 30 years building an empire that the city respected and that fear had held together. He was building something different now, smaller, slower, built from the particular unglamorous materials of Saturday mornings and oatmeal instructions, and 2 words on a landing in Philadelphia, "Come back," and 4 words in a Connecticut kitchen at 7 in the morning with a boy watching him from the floor. It was not a story anyone who knew his name would have expected. It was the only one in the end that had been worth living. The city went past the windows. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has let go of and is still learning not to reach for. Then he looked forward. The road was long and entirely ordinary, and his.